Hello everyone, we are group 4 and we are going to talk about the relationship between the church and the state in the Middle Ages.
Well, who was Lanfranc? Lanfranc was an Italian by birth. He had done notable work in Normandy as a scholar, teacher, and organizer, and in the wider sphere of activity of which he was now called, he showed himself an active and able statesman. The spiritual power of the popes was now becoming tremendously strong. The man who really inspired this development was Hildebrand, who later became Pope Gregory VII, 1073-1085. He declared that the Pope, being the representative of divine power on earth, ought to have supreme authority over all worldly rulers, and that to make church worthy of these claims, her clergy ought to be properly organized and disciplined. In particular, they ought not to marry. Lanfranc's great task was to bring the spirit of these Hildebrandian reforms into England. He brought over a number of able Norman clerics to replace the slack and incompetent Anglo-Saxon abbots and bishops. He reformed monasteries, reorganized bishoprics, and started schools. He enforced celibacy and pure living among the clergy. Magnificent church buildings began to rise all over the country. Under his influence, William established separate church courts to deal with cases that concerned ecclesiastical affairs such as wills and marriages and accusations against clerics.
The investiture contest. The investiture contest was the name given to a great dispute between Henry I and Anselm. Such a dispute reflects a conflict of power about how far was the feudal system to be applied to the lands of the church. One of the biggest questions um, was who should be able to appoint men to be bishops and abbots, and there were two possibilities, the Pope and the Prince. If the ceremony was performed by the Pope, the Prince would lose control and authority over his dominions as well as revenue from them. in the case of the prince or the king, he would would choose unsuitable candidates. So, who should be able to invest prelates with the symbols of office, the ring and the crozier? When Ansel came back to England, he refused to do homage for the hands of the archbishopric and to receive the sacred symbols from Henry's hands. He did that because he was on the Pope's side, and the quarrel or the conflict continued for 6 years old. And Ansel went back to the continent to consult with the Pope. Finally, the conflict reached an agreement in which the Pope was the only one to invest bishops and abbots, but the clerics or bishops and abbots had to do homage to the king for their states. William I had scattered the church the privilege of trying in its own law courts all cases related to wills, marriage, all cases concerning church property, and all cases in which clerics were concerned. That is to say, the benefit of the clergy consisted on separated courts of law. With this benefit, Henry II was upset because he had different plans in order to establish uniform system of law throughout the country, for these courts were independent of his authority. Also, we see that the benefit of the clergy did not only protect priests, it only protected men of minor orders such as servants of different monasteries and clerics of the cura regis, which they could claim it if they were accused of different crimes or something like that. When a man, for instance, when a man was caught red-handed in crime, if the accused man spoke different or a few words in Latin, it was assumed that that man belonged to the clerics or to the church, and he must be tried in a court Christian. One of the worst things of this was that these courts could only inflict minor penalties such as fines, penances, or, in the worst of the cases, degradation from holy orders. When the Archbishop of Canterbury died, Henry II determined to appoint Thomas Becket to that position in order to have the head of the English clergy on his side. Thomas Becket was a cleric and chancellor of Henry II. Firstly, he tried to persuade the Pope and the Church to give up the benefit of the clergy, but later on he began to uphold the interest of the Church, and he changed his mind and also sides and positions, because then he was on the Pope's side. As a result, Henry II continued to prevent the benefit of the clergy, but by his own. Some years later, Henry II proposed the constitutions of Clarendon in order to prevent the benefit of the clergy. At the very beginning, Becket was against them because he did not accept them, and as well as he did not want to carry them out. So Becket did not receive the Pope's support, and in order to prevent a conflict with Henry, he took a refuge in a monastery in France. There were 4 measures to be approved by Thomas Becket. The first one is that clerics could not leave the country without king's permission. The second is that a serf could not enter the church without Lord's permission, because they want to avoid that serfs become clerics. And when a cleric was found guilty, and after the degradation, that man had to be dealt with as an ordinary layman in a different court. And disputes about church property were to be heard before ordinary courts, and no appeals were to be made to the Pope to reserve the decisions of these courts. The absence of Becket from England placed Henry in a difficult position. In order to guard a disputed succession, Henry wanted his eldest son to be king, and as we know, the coronation and the ceremony is performed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and as Becket didn't want to do that, Henry suggested that the coronation should be led by the Archbishop of York. But then Becket was against it, and Henry thought that the Pope could nullify the coronation and his eldest son as king. When Becket returned to England, he suspended the bishops of York and Lincoln, and he punished all bishops that were on the king's side during the quarrel. Later on, Henry II tried to reach an agreement with Becket, but as he was a determined man, he continued with his same ideology, idea, and thought as before. Then we see that there were 4 knights against Becket, and as a result, they murdered Becket in the cathedral. This episode was a total shock to the public, and it was considered a murder and a sacrilege. There were several consequences after Becket's death. We have that Henry II was obliged to withdraw his constitutions, and Thomas Becket was considered a saint, Saint Thomas Becket, and later on Henry was defeated. As regards the benefit of clergy, it remained until the Reformation during Henry VIII reign.